Welcome to the Owner's Playbook, the podcast for visionary business owners who are building something bigger than themselves. I'm Carol Dewey, founder of Claris Advisory Partners and creator of the Navigator System. Each week, we explore strategies that help business owners increase business value, preserve more of what they create, and ultimately achieve the freedom they imagined when they first decided to become entrepreneurs. Over the last several weeks, we've been following Sarah's journey. Sarah built a successful business. She discovered that success doesn't always create freedom. She realized she had become the bottleneck inside her own company. And in our last episode, she made the decision to begin changing that. Today, we pick up where Sarah left off, because reducing owner dependence is only the beginning. The bigger question is this: what are you actually trying to build? A business or an enterprise? Today's episode is called Stop Building a Business and Start Building an Enterprise. And while those two words may sound similar, I believe they represent completely different ways of thinking. So let's get started. 6 months have passed since Sarah made the commitment to stop being the center of everything. She began documenting processes, delegating authority, developing her leadership team, encouraging clients to build relationships with others inside the company instead of relying exclusively on her. It wasn't easy. There were mistakes. Some employees struggled with the additional responsibility. Sarah occasionally wanted to jump back in and take control, but she stayed committed. Eventually, something happened. She booked another vacation. Her husband joked, "So should I bring your laptop?" She smiled. No, for the first time in years, she actually meant it. The first morning they sat together on a dock overlooking the water, coffee in hand. Watching the sunrise, Sarah instinctively reached for her phone. Nothing. No emergency texts, no frantic voicemails, no employee asking for approval, no client demanding to speak with her. She checked her email. A few routine messages. Everything else had already been handled. She looked at her husband. He smiled and said, "I've never seen you this relaxed." Sarah laughed. Then she said something that surprised even her. "I finally feel like I own my business." That moment had nothing to do with the vacation. It had everything to do with what the vacation represented, and that was freedom. I think many entrepreneurs use the words business and enterprise interchangeably. I don't. To me, they're very different. A business creates income and enterprise creates value. A business depends on activity and enterprise creates systems. A business often revolves around one person. An enterprise can continue creating value even when the founder isn't in the room. That's the shift Sarah was beginning to experience. She wasn't just improving operations. She was changing the nature of what she owned. And that distinction matters because buyers don't purchase hard work. They purchase predictable value. One of the greatest transitions an entrepreneur can make is moving from firefighter to architect. Early in your business, you have no choice. You're solving every problem, making every decision, putting out every fire. You wear every hat because there isn't anyone else to wear them. That's how businesses are born. But many entrepreneurs never leave that stage. Years later, they're still solving every problem personally. They're still approving every expense, still answering every difficult client question, still carrying the entire business on their shoulders. At some point, you have to ask yourself, am I building something that depends on me, or am I designing something that can outlive me? Architects create structures. Firefighters respond to emergencies. The entrepreneur who becomes an enterprise builder learns to spend more time designing than reacting. When people hear the word systems, they often think about software or operations manuals or complicated flowcharts. I think about something much simpler. A system is just simply a decision you only have to make once. Think about that. Every time you solve the problem over and over again, you're spending your time instead of investing it. Every recurring question from your team is an opportunity to build a better system. Every repeated mistake points to a missing process. Every interruption is asking the same question. Can this be handled without you next time? Systems aren't about bureaucracy. They're about creating consistency. They're about creating confidence. Most importantly, they're about creating freedom. Every documented process, every trained leader, every empowered employee, every clear expectation, each one buys back a little more of your time. One of the biggest mindset shifts I encourage business owners to make is this. Stop asking, how do I grow my business? And start asking, how do I increase the value of my enterprise? Those are not the same question. Growth is wonderful, but growth without system often creates more stress. Growth without leadership creates more dependence. Growth without profitability creates more problems. Enterprise builders think differently. They ask, can this scale? Can this be duplicated? Can this operate consistently? Can this survive uncertainty? Can someone else successfully own this someday? Those questions dramatically change the decisions you make every day. About a year after Sarah began making these changes, her phone rang. It was the same acquisition firm that had approached her the previous year. The buyer had heard good things and they wanted another conversation. This time, the due diligence process looked very different. Who manages your largest client relationships? Our leadership team. What happens if you're unavailable? The business continues. Can someone else present to your largest prospects? Absolutely. Are your core operating procedures documented? Yep. Who approves day-to-day decisions? Our department leaders. The financials were stronger, employee retention had improved, margins had increased. The company wasn't working harder, it was working smarter. Several weeks later, Sarah received another offer. This one was substantially higher than the first. So what changed? The business hadn't doubled in revenue. Sarah hadn't suddenly become more talented. What changed was risk. The buyer wasn't purchasing Sarah anymore. The buyer was purchasing an enterprise, and that's worth considerably more. But now you're probably noticing that everything we've discussed keeps coming back to the owner's wealth triangle: business value, tax efficiency, and personal freedom. At first, Sarah focused almost exclusively on the business value. Then she realized tax efficiency preserved more of what she created. Now she's experiencing the third side of the triangle: personal freedom. Notice something important? Freedom wasn't something she found. Freedom was something she intentionally built. One system at a time, enterprise creates transferable value. Most importantly, an enterprise becomes one of the greatest assets you'll ever own, instead of becoming the greatest obligation you carry. And I think that's what every entrepreneur is really chasing. Not more work, not more stress, and not more revenue. Not even more revenue, I should say. They're chasing the freedom to decide how they spend their time. Because at the end of the day, that's the ultimate return on investment. Thank you for joining me for another episode of The Owner's Playbook. I'm Carol Dewey, founder of Claris Advisory Partners and creator of the Navigator System. If today's conversation challenged the way you think about entrepreneurship, I'd encourage you to subscribe and share this episode with another business owner who may be working too hard inside a business they've already grown or outgrown. And next time, Sarah discovers that building a valuable enterprise is only part of the journey. Because once you've created something worth protecting, the next question becomes, how do you make sure one unexpected event doesn't undo everything you've spent years building? Until next time, keep building with